The ballroom of Ashford House blazed with the light of 10,000 candles, but not one of them seemed to reach the corner where Alara Ashford stood. She was the Duchess of Thornwood, yet she might as well have been a ghost. The announcement of their names had barely faded when her husband walked away from her without a single glance, his broad back a wall of cold indifference, leaving her to face the glittering crowd alone. Whispers spread like cracks through ice. There she is, the fallen bride. They say he cannot bear to touch her. What did she expect marrying after such a scandal? Alara kept her chin high, her hands clasped in front of her dove-gray silk gown, but inside something fragile was already breaking. Again. She had learned to endure these evenings the way one endures a brutal winter, by going numb. A year ago she had been a hopeful young woman, the daughter of a modest baron, loved for her gentle nature and her skill with herbs and flowers. She had never dreamed of becoming a duchess. But fate, cruel and twisted, had taken her life and crushed it in its fist. All of London knew the story, or the version they chose to believe. A scandalous night in the gardens of Locksley Hall, a notorious rake, Lord Cedric Blackwood, and the young woman discovered in his arms, her reputation shattered beyond repair. That woman, everyone said, was Alara Vance. The Ton had devoured the news with relish. No one had cared to ask if the story was true. It was not. Alara had stepped forward, head bowed, and claimed the shame as her own to save another, Lady Margaret Ashford, her dearest friend, the sweet and reckless younger sister of the Duke of Thornwood. Margaret had been the one truly compromised, too naive and too terrified to face the consequences. Alara, who had only been trying to pull Margaret away from Cedric's smooth words, made the sacrifice without hesitation. She had thought in that moment that honor and friendship demanded it. She had not known, then, what the cost would be. The Duke of Thornwood, Alexander Ashford, had been summoned from London by his distraught mother. The scandal threatened to taint the Ashford name. The Dowager Duchess, a woman who had once loved Alara's late mother like a sister, proposed a solution. Alexander would marry Alara Vance. The marriage would silence the worst of the gossip, provide Alara with a respectable position, and secure a political alliance with the Vance family. Alexander had agreed, his face carved from stone. He did not love her. He did not trust her. He believed he was marrying a woman of loose morals to protect his family's honor, and he had never forgiven her for it. That was how Alara became the Duchess of Thornwood, a bride in a gown of white lies, walking down an aisle toward a man whose gray eyes held nothing but winter. Now at the ball, she watched her husband move through the crowd with effortless authority. Alexander Ashford was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back and features of cold, aristocratic perfection. He commanded respect without raising his voice. To the world, he was the epitome of power. To Alara, he was a locked door she had stopped knocking on months ago. She saw him pause to speak with Lord and Lady Halston, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. A smile he never turned in her direction. The pain was a dull ache now, not the sharp stab it had once been. She had spent the first 6 months of their marriage trying to reach him, leaving small posies of lavender on his desk, learning his favorite dishes and quietly instructing the cook, wearing the blue gown his mother said he favored. He had never acknowledged any of it. The lavender was swept away. The meals were eaten in silence. The blue gown hung in her wardrobe until the color began to feel like mourning. A gentle voice broke through her thoughts. "Your Grace, you look as though you could use a glass of lemonade." Alara turned. A kind-faced older woman, Lady Prudence Marwood, stood beside her, holding out a crystal glass. The lines around her eyes spoke of a life filled with laughter, but now they held only sympathy. Alara accepted the glass with a grateful nod. "You are most perceptive, Lady Marwood." "I am old enough to see what others choose to ignore," Lady Prudence said softly, her gaze flicking toward the Duke, who was now deep in conversation with a beautiful widow, Lady Cassandra Firth. The widow's gloved hand rested on his sleeve for a moment too long. "My dear, do not let them see you bleed. You are stronger than that." Alara took a sip of the cool lemonade, the tartness grounding her. "I believe I have bled dry, my lady. There is nothing left to wound." Lady Prudence's expression tightened with compassion, but before she could reply, the music swelled. Couples began to form for the quadrille. Alara saw the Duke turn, his eyes scanning the room. For a single, treacherous heartbeat, she thought his gaze might search for her. But it did not. He walked instead to Lady Cassandra and offered his hand. The widow's triumphant smile was a blade slipped between Alara's ribs. She set down the glass on a passing tray. "If you will excuse me, Lady Marwood, I find I have a sudden headache." She left the ballroom without a backward glance. Her slippered feet carried her down the marble hallway, past footmen who looked away in embarrassment, toward the waiting carriage. The night air outside was cold and clean, a balm against her heated cheeks. She climbed into the carriage alone, just as she had arrived alone. The Duke had insisted they travel separately. "You will wish to stay later than I do," he had said, a lie disguised as courtesy. She knew what he meant. He did not want to be seen with her. As the carriage rattled through the dark streets of London, Alara pressed her forehead against the cool glass and let the tears fall silently. She cried not for the man he was, but for the girl she had been, the girl who had once believed love could grow from duty, that kindness could thaw even the deepest frost. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who had learned to walk through fire without making a sound. The next morning dawned gray and still. Alara woke in her lavish bedchamber at Thornwood House and stared at the silk canopy overhead. The house was quiet. The Duke was already gone to his club or his parliamentary duties. A strange emptiness settled in her chest, a hollowing out that was becoming familiar. She went through the motions of the day: breakfast alone, correspondence with the housekeeper, a walk in the small garden behind the house. The winter roses were struggling to bloom. She knelt in the damp soil to gently coax a new shoot free of dead leaves. The earth beneath her nails was the only thing that felt real. A footman approached with a silver tray, a letter. It was from her father's steward, informing her that the quarterly allowance had arrived and that her younger brother was improving in his studies. Small mercies. She tucked the letter into her pocket and returned to her roses. In the soil, she found a fragile piece. It was the one thing that had not been taken from her. Later that day, the Dowager Duchess paid an unexpected visit. Margaret's mother swept into the drawing room like a ship in full sail, her mourning silks rustling with purpose. She had been a widow for 5 years and ruled her family with an iron will. "Ara, my dear." She took Alara's hands and kissed her cheek. The gesture was warm, genuine. The Dowager had always treated her with affection, even after the scandal. She knew the truth. She had been the one to find them that night, to hear Margaret's sobbing confession, and to beg Alara to shield her daughter. It was the Dowager who had pushed for the marriage, not out of cold strategy alone, but out of a desperate wish to protect Alara from utter ruin. Yet even she could not force her son to love. "You look tired," the Dowager said, settling onto a chaise. "These London seasons are draining. You should return to Thornwood Hall. The country air will do you good." Alara managed a small smile. "Perhaps. His Grace has not expressed a preference." The Dowager's lips thinned. "My son rarely expresses anything that matters. He locks his heart in a vault and throws away the key. I have failed him in that." She paused, her eyes searching Alara's face. "Have you thought of finding your own happiness, child, beyond him?" Alara looked down at her hands. "I am trying, Your Grace. I think I am finally learning to." The Dowager nodded slowly. "Then go to Thornwood. I will remain in London and manage my son for a while. You need space to breathe." So it was decided. Within a week, Alara left for the family's country estate, Thornwood Hall, a sprawling Elizabethan manor surrounded by ancient oaks and wildflower meadows. She traveled alone, with only her maid for company. The Duke was informed by a brief note left on his desk. He did not reply. At Thornwood, the silence was different. It was not the oppressive silence of a loveless marriage. It was the peaceful silence of nature. Alara threw herself into the land. She visited the tenant cottages, bringing baskets of food and her knowledge of herbal remedies. She helped the head gardener plan a new medicinal garden. She began a journal of botanical sketches, spending hours in the greenhouse among the ferns and the scent of damp earth. The days passed in quiet purpose. She no longer waited for letters that never came. She no longer strained her ears for the sound of approaching hooves. She began to forget the shape of her husband's face. But the world had not forgotten her. One afternoon, a visitor arrived. Alara was in the library, a dusty, beautiful room that had been neglected for years, when the butler announced Lord Julian Thorne. Her heart lifted with genuine pleasure. Julian was a childhood friend, the second son of the Earl of Westbrook, a scholar of botany and a gentle soul. He had traveled to the continent for years, studying rare plants, and had recently returned to England to catalogue the great estate libraries for a horticultural society. He strode into the library with his familiar lopsided grin, brown hair windswept, and eyes bright with curiosity. "Alara, or should I say, Your Grace, you've become grand." She laughed, a sound that surprised her. It had been so long. "Julian, you impossible man, you look as though you've been sleeping in hedgerows." "Only the finest hedgerows," he said, taking her hands warmly. "I heard you were at Thornwood, and I could not pass up the chance to see you, and to raid your library. Rumor has it there are unread manuscripts on medieval herbal remedies here." They spent the afternoon poring over old books, their conversation flowing easily. Julian spoke of his travels with such enthusiasm that Alara felt a spark of her old self rekindle. He did not treat her as a disgraced duchess. He treated her as Alara, the girl who had once caught tadpoles with him in the stream at Westbrook. There was no pity in his eyes, only friendship. When he left at dusk, promising to return in a few days with his notebooks, Alara felt a warmth she had not known in a year. It was not love, her heart was too bruised for that, but it was a reminder that she was still a person worthy of respect and laughter. That night, she wrote in her journal by candlelight, "I am beginning to see that my worth does not lie in his gaze. I am learning to live again." The Duke arrived at Thornwood 2 weeks later, unannounced, as was his habit. Alara was in the greenhouse, repotting seedlings of a rare night-blooming cereus that Julian had gifted her from his collection. She heard the crunch of gravel and looked up to see the great black carriage rolling to a stop before the house. Her hands stilled. Her heart gave a traitorous flutter before she tamped it down with practiced discipline. She wiped her soil-stained fingers on her apron and walked toward the house with a steady, measured pace. Alexander was standing in the entrance hall, handing his gloves to the butler. He was immaculate in a charcoal riding coat, his face unreadable. When he saw her, his eyes flicked over her simple muslin dress, the dirt on her cheek, the apron. A faint frown creased his brow. "You look rustic." "I have been gardening, Your Grace. It is a healthy pursuit." Her voice was calm, devoid of the need to please. He studied her for a moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "My mother tells me you have been playing Lady Bountiful among the tenants. The gossip columns have even taken note, praising your charitable works, a clever strategy to improve your image." The words stung, but they no longer wounded deeply. "I did not do it for strategy. I did it because they needed help and I needed purpose, two things that require no public acclaim." He seemed taken aback by her directness. In the early months she would have lowered her eyes and murmured apologies. Now she met his gaze steadily. Something shifted in the gray depths, a flicker of confusion, perhaps even respect, but it vanished quickly. "I will be staying for a few weeks," he said, turning away. "There are estate matters that require my attention. We shall dine together this evening. Do not be late." "I am never late, Your Grace." She gave a small curtsy and left him standing in the hall, her back straight, her heart encased in quiet armor. Dinner that night was a study in strained civility. The long mahogany table stretched between them like a frozen river. Candlelight flickered on silver and crystal. Alara had changed into a gown of soft sage green, her hair simply dressed. She ate her soup in silence, answering his occasional questions about the estate with polite, factual replies. He asked about the tenants, the harvest, the repairs to the east wing. She answered. He did not ask about her. The footmen served the second course. Alexander set down his wine glass and spoke abruptly. "Lord Julian Thorne has been seen visiting here. Frequently, I am told." Alara's spoon paused midair. She set it down carefully. "He is cataloging the library for his botanical research. I have known him since childhood. His company is pleasant." "Pleasant?" The Duke's voice was flat. "I do not wish my wife to be the subject of further scandal. The Tun has a long memory. You would do well to remember that." A cold fire kindled in her chest. "I have done nothing improper, Your Grace. Lord Thorne is a friend. He does not judge me based on rumors. He offers conversation and respect, two things I have been denied in my own home." The silence that followed was thunderous. The footmen held their breath. Alexander's knuckles whitened on the stem of his glass. For a moment, Alara thought he might explode in cold fury. Instead, he simply set the glass down with a soft click and rose from his chair. "I find I have lost my appetite. Good evening." He left. The door closed behind him with a quiet finality. Alara sat alone at the vast table, the candles guttering in a draught. She finished her meal slowly, bite by bite, and tasted not the food but the sharp, unfamiliar taste of her own strength. She had spoken her truth, and she had not crumbled. The days that followed were marked by a new, strange tension. The Duke was present at Thornwood, but they moved in parallel orbits, rarely intersecting. He threw himself into estate business, riding out at dawn and returning late, his clothes dusty and his expression unreadable. She continued her work with the tenants and her greenhouse. They met at meals, which became increasingly brief. She no longer attempted to fill the silence. She let it stretch, and in that emptiness he seemed adrift. One afternoon she was in the village, delivering a poultice to a farmer's child burning with fever. The small cottage was dark and damp, the family poor but proud. Alara knelt by the straw pallet, her hands gentle as she applied the cool, herbal paste to the child's forehead and whispered soothing words. The mother wept with gratitude. "God bless you, Your Grace. You have the healer's touch." Alara stayed until the fever broke, then walked out into the pale sunlight, her heart heavy but full. Julian rode up on his gray mare just as she was brushing the dust from her skirts. He dismounted with easy grace and smiled at her. "The Lady Bountiful strikes again. I passed 3 tenants who sang your praises. You've become a local saint." She laughed softly, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Hardly. I just mix herbs and hold hands. It's simple." "It's more than that," Julian said, his tone serious. "You've given them hope. And yourself, I think. You look different, Alara, lighter, as if a weight has been lifted." She looked away toward the green hills. "I'm learning that I cannot control how others see me. I can only control my own actions. I wasted so much time longing for something that was never offered. I'm done with longing." Julian was silent for a moment. Then he said quietly, "If you ever need a friend to talk to or a place to escape, my door is always open. You deserve happiness, Alara, real, unshadowed happiness." She turned back to him, her eyes glistening. "Thank you, Julian. You are a true friend. I treasure that." They did not embrace, but the Duke, returning from a ride along the ridge, saw them standing close together in the village lane, their heads bent in intimate conversation. He saw the way Julian looked at her with tenderness, with admiration, and something dark and unfamiliar twisted in his chest. He pulled his horse to a stop, watching for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he turned and spurred his horse away, leaving a cloud of dust. That evening he summoned her to his study. Alara entered to find him standing by the window, his back to her. The room smelled of leather and brandy and barely suppressed anger. "You wish to see me, Your Grace?" He turned, his gray eyes were stormy. "I saw you with Lord Thorne today, in the village. You seemed very comfortable together." Alara's heart sank, but she kept her voice even. He stopped to speak. "We are friends, nothing more." "Friends?" He spat the word. "You are the Duchess of Thornwood. Your conduct reflects upon this house, upon my name. I will not have you parading a friendship with an unmarried man for all the county to gossip about." "There is nothing improper." I do not care. He slammed his hand on the desk, the sound like a gunshot. I have endured enough whispers because of you. I will not endure more. Alara flinched but did not retreat. She took a slow breath and spoke with a clarity that came from a well of pain finally overflowing. You have endured whispers. Your Grace, I have endured a year of silence, of coldness, of being treated as though I were invisible or beneath contempt. I have stood in ballrooms while you danced with other women, while people said I was a fallen creature who trapped you into marriage. I have borne it all without a word of complaint because I believed it was my penance. But I am done. I am done paying for a crime I did not commit. He stared at her, stunned. What are you saying? She met his gaze, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I am saying that I am no longer going to beg for your love or your trust. I have found my own worth. If you cannot see it, then that is your tragedy, not mine. Lord Thorn is my friend. He treats me with kindness. I will not give that up to soothe your unfounded jealousy. The word jealousy hit him like a physical blow. He recoiled, his face paling. I am not jealous. Then what is this? She whispered. What is this rage if not the fear of something you never wanted but now cannot bear to see in another's hands? He had no answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy and aching. Finally, Alara turned and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob. I am going to the cottage in the morning, my grandmother's cottage on the edge of the estate. I need time to think. I suggest you do the same. She left. Alexander stood frozen, the echo of her words ringing in his ears. He had come here to assert control, and instead she had laid his soul bare. Jealousy. Yes, it was jealousy. He had seen the light in Julian Thorne's eyes, a light he had never allowed himself to show, and it had terrified him. He had spent a year convincing himself that his wife was unworthy of his affection, that she had trapped him, that she was a woman of loose morals. But somewhere along the way, the lie had worn thin, and the truth was staring at him now. He was a coward who had been too proud to love his own wife. He poured himself a brandy and drank it down, but the burn did nothing to quench the cold dread spreading through him. She was leaving. Not forever, perhaps, but she was stepping away, and he had no right to stop her. He had driven her to this. He had taken a woman who had once looked at him with hope in her eyes and turned her into a stranger who no longer cared. And the worst part was that he was beginning to realize he loved her. He had loved her from the first moment he saw her 2 years ago at a country dance, when she had laughed and her hair had caught the sunset. But when the scandal broke, that love had curdled into wounded pride, and he had buried it so deep he had almost forgotten it was there. Almost. Now, standing alone in his study, he felt the full weight of his regret. It was like a stone tied around his heart. Alara did not go to the cottage the next morning. She woke early before dawn and sat at her writing desk. She penned a letter not to Julian but to Alexander. She wrote down everything. The truth of that night at Locksley Hall, Margaret's tearful confession, the dowager's plea, her own decision to take the blame because she loved Margaret like a sister and could not bear to see her ruined. She wrote of the year of silence, the loneliness, the small hopes she had nurtured and seen crushed. She wrote that she was releasing him from any obligation, that she would retire quietly to the cottage and cause no scandal, and that he could seek an annulment if he wished. She wrote that she had never loved Lord Cedric Blackwood, had never even spoken to him, and that her heart, battered as it was, had once belonged entirely to him, Alexander, until she had been forced to let it go. She folded the letter, sealed it with wax, and left it on his desk. Then she packed a small valise with a few gowns, her journal, and her most precious botanical books. She left the jewels he had given her. They felt like chains. She would take only what was truly hers. She was descending the staircase when the front door burst open. Alexander stood there disheveled, his cravat untied, his eyes wild. He had been out walking the grounds all night, tormented. He had seen the light in her window and had come back, unable to stay away. He saw the valise in her hand and his face went white. "You're leaving," he said, his voice hoarse. "I have left you a letter. It explains everything. Please let me pass." No, he stepped forward, blocking her path. No, I read the letter. I went to my study just now and I read it. He held up the crumpled paper, his hand trembling. It's all lies. The scandal, it was Margaret. It was never you. Alara's composure cracked. Tears welled in her eyes. I did it to protect her. I thought you knew. Your mother knew. My mother, he swayed as if struck. My mother knew and said nothing. She let me believe, dear God, Alara. His voice broke on her name. I have been so blind, so cruel. All this time you were innocent. You sacrificed yourself for my sister and I punished you for it. I punished you. He dropped the letter and covered his face with his hands, a sound wrenching from his throat that was half sob, half agonized groan. Alara's tears fell freely now. She set down the valise. I did not tell you because Margaret begged me to keep it secret. She was terrified of your judgment. And I hoped that in time you might come to see me for who I truly was, not the story you believed. But you never looked. You never let yourself see. He lowered his hands, his eyes red-rimmed, shattered. I couldn't look because looking at you hurt. I wanted you so much and I thought you had given yourself to another. I turned my pain into ice. I'm a proud, foolish man and I have destroyed the only thing that ever mattered. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Alara, I loved you. I loved you from that first dance at the assembly in Westbrook. You wore a blue dress and you laughed like music. I had never seen anything so beautiful. When the scandal came, it felt like a betrayal of something that was already mine in my heart. I couldn't forgive you because I had already given you my soul without your knowledge. She stared at him, her heart pounding. You never said, you never showed me any sign. I was a coward. I was afraid of being vulnerable, and after the marriage my pride built walls so high I couldn't climb them. He reached out and took her hands, his touch gentle, pleading. I know I have no right to ask, but please don't leave. Stay. Let me spend the rest of my life making amends. Let me show you the love I should have given you from the start. Alara looked into his eyes, those gray eyes that had once been so cold, now burning with desperate hope and sorrow. She had spent a year building walls of her own, learning to live without him. But the foundation of those walls had always been the love she had once felt, the love that had been buried but not dead. She felt it stir now, a fragile shoot pushing through the ashes. I don't know if I can trust you, she whispered. I have been so hurt, Alexander. I know, and I will spend every day earning your trust. I will tell the world the truth. I will clear your name. I will stand beside you in every ballroom and dare anyone to whisper. But more than that, I will love you openly, without reservation, if you will let me. She was silent for a long moment. The valise sat on the marble floor between them, a symbol of the old life she was ready to leave. Finally, she squeezed his hands. I will stay, but it will take time, and you must promise me one thing. Anything. You must forgive Margaret. She has carried enough guilt. And you must let my friend Julian continue his work in the library without your jealousy poisoning the air. A flicker of the old pride crossed his face, but he nodded, a rueful smile breaking through the wreckage of his composure. I will try. I can promise to try. And as for Thorn, I think I can manage to be civil if he keeps his hands to himself and his eyes on the manuscripts. Despite everything, a small laugh bubbled up from Alara's chest. It was watery and thin. But it was real. That is a start. He pulled her gently into his arms, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. She stiffened for a heartbeat, then melted against him, the familiar scent of him, sandalwood and fresh air, flooding her senses. She had dreamed of this embrace for so long, and now it was here, born of pain and truth. That day marked the beginning of the long, slow healing. Alexander did not wait. He summoned Margaret from the dower house where she had been living in seclusion, and the three of them sat together in the drawing room. Margaret, pale and trembling, confessed everything with tears streaming down her face. She had been only 18, foolish and frightened, and when Alara stepped forward to take the blame, she had been too weak to stop her. Every day since had been a torment of guilt. Alexander listened in silence. Then he stood, walked to his sister, and embraced her. I forgive you, he said, his voice rough. I was not the one wronged. Alara was. It is her forgiveness you must seek." Margaret turned to Alara, and the two women held each other, sobbing. A weight lifted from the house, a ghost finally laid to rest. The Duke then wrote a public statement, carefully worded, revealing that the scandal at Locksley Hall had been a tragic misunderstanding, that his wife had acted only to protect another, and that he, the Duke of Thornwood, had been the greatest fool in all of England for not recognizing her virtue. The statement was published in the London papers and read aloud in the clubs. The ton erupted in shock, but the Duke's formidable reputation silenced most of the slander. Those who dared whisper found themselves cut by the Ashford family. The Dowager Duchess, finally free to speak the truth, added her own quiet confirmation to the ears that mattered most. The true test came at the next Grand London Ball. Alexander stood at the entrance with Alara on his arm, her gown a deep rose color that brought warmth to her cheeks. Every eye turned. For a moment, the whispers began, but then the Duke did something no one expected. He lifted Alara's hand to his lips and pressed a lingering kiss to her gloved knuckles, his gaze never leaving her face. It was a declaration, public and unmistakable. He led her onto the dance floor for the first waltz, and they moved together as if no one else existed. He danced with no one else that night. When Lady Cassandra Firth approached with a simpering smile, he turned a shoulder so cold that the widow retreated, humiliated. Alara, standing beside him, felt a warmth spread through her chest that was not from the candles. But the true healing happened in private, in the quiet moments that rebuilt a shattered marriage brick by brick. They walked together in the gardens at Thornwood, and Alexander asked her to teach him about the plants she loved. He knelt in the dirt beside her, ruining his fine trousers, to help her plant a new bed of moonflowers, the pale, night-blooming blossoms that had always been her favorite. He listened as she spoke of her journal, of the remedies she had made for the tenants, and he began to understand the depth of the woman he had married. He brought her rare botanical books from his London trips, leaving them on her pillow with a note that said simply, "Because you love them." Slowly, Alara's heart thawed. She found herself looking forward to his return when he was away. She began to leave small gifts again, a sprig of rosemary on his desk, a sketch of a flower she had drawn. But this time, he noticed. He pressed the rosemary into a book and kept the sketch in his breast pocket, close to his heart. One evening she heard him speaking to his steward about converting the old East Field into a medicinal herb garden for the village, a project she had only mentioned once, in passing. He had remembered. Julian visited once more to finish his catalogue of the library. Alexander greeted him with stiff politeness, then quietly excused himself, leaving them to their work. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. As Julian was leaving, he paused and took Alara's hand. "You are happy, truly?" he asked, searching her face. She smiled, a smile that reached her eyes. "I am learning to be. It is not perfect, but it is real." Julian nodded, a wistful look crossing his features. "Then I am glad. You deserve nothing less." He pressed a brotherly kiss to her forehead, mounted his horse, and rode away. Alexander, watching from the library window, felt a twist of something that was no longer jealousy, but gratitude. He had not lost her to a better man. He had been given a chance to become the man she deserved. Months passed. The seasons turned, and with them the quiet rhythms of their life at Thornwood Hall. The scandal became old news, replaced by fresher gossip. The Duke and Duchess were seen often in the village, walking together, their heads bent in conversation. The tenants adored them. The estate flourished. And somewhere along the way, the careful distance between them disappeared entirely, replaced by a gentle, abiding affection that grew deeper with every shared sunrise. One evening, in the golden light of late summer, they sat on a stone bench overlooking the lake. The moonflowers were beginning to bloom, their pale petals unfurling in the dusk like tiny ghosts of hope. The air was soft with the scent of honeysuckle. Alexander took Alara's hand, his thumb tracing her knuckles with a tenderness that had become second nature. "I have a confession," he said, his voice low. She turned to him, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Another one." He smiled back, a soft, unguarded smile that transformed his stern features into something boyish and almost shy. "I stole a ribbon from your hair that first night we danced, 2 years ago. A blue ribbon. I kept it in my pocket for months, like a lovesick boy. I still have it in a box in my study." Her eyes widened. "You never said." "I was too proud, but I want no more secrets between us. I want you to know that you have always been the keeper of my heart, even when I was too blind to see it. I loved you too late, but I love you now with everything I am. Every day I will love you more." Tears glistened on her lashes, but they were tears of healing, not of pain. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "And you have mine, Alexander. I think you always have. I just stopped listening to it for a while." He pressed a kiss to her hair, tender and reverent. "I will spend my life making sure you never stop listening again." They sat in silence as the moonflowers opened around them, a garden of second chances. The past was still there, a faint scar that would never fully fade, but it no longer held power. In its place grew something stronger, a love forged in regret, watered with forgiveness, and rooted in the unshakable knowledge that they had nearly lost each other, but had found their way back. When the stars came out, they walked back to the house hand in hand. The moon rose behind them, huge and silver, and the silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with all the words they would say in the years to come, all the laughter, all the quiet mornings and the gentle nights, all the small kindnesses that built a lifetime. And the years were many, and they were good. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, let us know in the comments which country you're watching from. Your support means a lot to us. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next amazing story.